All right. My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Mike Osborn. It's December 16th, 2025, and we're at Domain Willamette in Dayton. And Mike, thank you so much for joining us today. First question, why wine?
Why wine? Why not wine? I came into this industry from being in software from a young age, and I didn't have a real job, as my mother and I have called it, in high school. I rather did software work, and it was early on. And in that industry, this is I graduated in high school in '87, so 3 years prior, I was taking apart computers, putting them back together again. Thank God, putting them back together again. But also software work. So in my early 20s, I had strong earnings from software, and that gave me a chance to enjoy dinners out, be entertained or entertain others, and wine was always part of that occasion. I didn't grow up with wine in the household much at all. Christmas and Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, perhaps, but family wasn't much into wine. But I had a great curiosity, and in my early 20s, adopted it as a hobby or a habit. Maybe a hobby is probably best. So that is how I started with it. And that software business led me to creating a large database about wine and e-commerce with wine, which I can describe.
Sure. We'll come back to that in a second. Tell us about where you're born and raised and kind of early life before wine. I
was born in Medford, Oregon. My family lived in Medford when I was born, but very shortly after moved to nearby Center Point, Oregon. So I went to Crater High School in Southern Oregon, and kindergarten through 12th grade in the same house. In fact, my folks, I think they moved. I left maybe in June after graduating. I moved about 3 weeks later to Portland, and my folks, I think, sold their house, months later, and built a new home for them in Medford. So they hung out for me, all kindergarten through 12th grade in Central Point.
And what college did you go to, and how did you choose it?
Well, I went to a little bit of college. I chose to go to the big city. I chose to go to Portland State University, and under the auspices of a business school, and being in a metropolitan market. But frankly, I was going up there because I knew there was opportunities for my software business, and I attended school for about a year and a half, and then didn't. And I secured a lease nearby Portland State, and 12th and I think it was 12th and Morrison. Anyway, in a fantastic little space. The family rented a 18-year-old an office space so I could start my business there and not in my apartment. That's what launched me there. It was interesting because the university system was a customer of mine, and I remember conversations with the head of the computer science program, or at least one of the professors at Portland State, who was purchasing software from us, and therefore it was a little awkward. I wasn't going to learn something from the computer science program when we were creating it, and so it was just the right time for me to do something different, like not go to school and rather focus on the business.
So tell me about the business and about its kind of its origins and what the original goal was.
Well, this was early days of different kinds of database applications. Primarily, had a great client in a architectural firm who was doing asbestos abatement projects. So I remember working with an architect in Portland, Stephen Smiley, and his business. Extraordinary, mentor at the time, able to help me, get some energy around creating database software that helped his firm do, asbestos abatement work for primarily for government. I remember one of my projects took me down to Sandia National Labs to Albuquerque, and I do recall I was 21, turning 21 in Albuquerque, which is less wine, more tequila, perhaps margaritas, but nevertheless, early days it was mostly all database work. Later on, we did some low-level device driver work for companies like Hewlett-Packard, Intel, and Microsoft. So not bad if you're in Portland, Oregon. You're HP's printer divisions, Corvallis, Intel Systems division and finance team were in Hillsboro, Oregon. Microsoft's in Redmond, Washington. We all know how close that was. So those three accounts kept us really busy. And it's not consumer-facing work primarily. It was low-level things behind the scenes, device drivers, things that allow you, connect a printer to an Ethernet network, if you will, and in that communication with driver software and the like. Fun stuff, and it gave me a chance to learn a lot about that industry and different parts of software. I merged that company in, and I know I'm probably I didn't look all these dates up here, boy, Rich, 1992-ish, with a very old Portland business called Columbia Typewriter and Recorder. By the time it was called CTR Business Systems, but it was a company established in the early 1900s, and that business, led by Ed Israel, gave me a chance to come into a larger company, and at one point we probably had 150, 160 people in it doing systems integration work, sales of computers and equipment and the like. And this is at the time of the internet just coming into fruition. And I know CTR had the franchise of Sun Microsystems. There were some early opportunities to learn about the interwebs, the internet, and so I mean even the company was www.ctr.com. Doesn't lead to the company anymore, but lightweight URLs. So later in my life I did trap down that wine.com as an example. That this was all very early in early days, if you will. CTR was ultimately sold in 1999, but in 98 I was, 99 or 2000, 99, thank you. In 1998 I got involved with some e-commerce software and really had an interest in what that could do for consumer behavior. Catalogs were interesting or not. I grew up in a valley where Harry and David was the predominant, business, one of the largest employers, and that was largely catalog business, and later, some e-commerce and the like. But I liked consumer retail, and then I can go back to tell you, I had a wine interest. And I would remember, walking into, for instance, Zupan's Market near my home, and I would bring the latest issue of the Wine Spectator magazine with me, under my arm, under my shoulder, and be looking, through the Wine Spectator at the wall of wine, trying to seek out the wines that were mentioned. And you could say I got discouraged often because some of the wines that were mentioned were not on the shelves at retail. But otherwise, the amount of information that was missing from the front and back label of a wine, I felt was really important. And again, I'm a database guy. I like structured information, and I would tell you I really like objective information versus subjective, meaning matters of fact. And this industry is so unique because you've got a product, you get the name of the product, you got where it was grown, you got who made it, it's got a vintage, it's got a grape or many in it, and percentage of alcohol. There's a bunch of objective information. Even, as we well know, in Oregon especially, interesting owners that may not be the winemaker. So there's another story to be told about that. And so the interest in database was just, let's get all the information about this wine. It really had nothing to do with, do I like it? Do you like it? Does my wife like it? It's like, no, that's not what we tried to collect. There are plenty of people who offer commentary, and I didn't want to do that. I just created a very large database and deployed that database with e-commerce. So the first business name was Vineyard, and we started in Portland as Vineyard. And at the time, there were other E's. I mean, there still are. eBay and E-Trade and were around. E-Toys at the time that ended pretty abruptly. I think by year 2000. But the E's were popular, and that's how we started it. evineyard.com. And I recall back to creating that database. We put our first warehouse down on Swan Island, and it was close to UPS, and across the fence line from what was then Columbia Distributing, Ed Miletus's business in Oregon, that wholesale business, which had a lot of the wines that I cherished, and UPS was right there on Swan Island. We just sandwiched a warehouse in between the two sites in order to have good, strong logistics, because that's part of shipping wine. But I remember in the data, I'll go back to the database. I think I've told David this story. It was like, definitely Adelsheim was vineyard entry number 1. Argyle is bound to be number 2 or 3, thanks to our friendship I had with Roland Souls. And it's like, I'm pretty sure I start with the A's. Maybe that's a big part of it too. But Domaine Drouin, Oregon, and Willamette Valley Vineyards, even with the W, they're in the top 20 of our winery ID. And you should know, over a course of then a few more decades, we were selling wines from 9,000 producers, wines, and about 2,500 spirits ultimately, 40,000 wines a year. But the Oregon wines, going back to that, were the first in the database and the first that we archived, with information starting in that, it's 1999, we would have been selling, the 96, 97 vintages.
So tell me about those days of, obviously you had about a decade there of massive growth on the technological sphere. So tell me a little bit about from when you start your first business to the dawning of e-commerce. What are the leaps being made technologically, and what does the early e-commerce look like?
The early days of e-commerce, we launched on a platform that was licensed by Intel and another partner of theirs, SAP, and the project was called Pandesic, interesting enough, but it was a joint venture between Intel and SAP. It didn't last very long, maybe 18 months in. That business had shuttered, but what we had a chance to do is to really jumpstart the eVineyard website on the back of some very, great technology, wonderful technology. And in fact, I had a chance early in my work, again, with Intel as a contractor, but now then as a vendor at CTR. Harold Hughes, the CFO of Intel, I think he joined them in 1972. So long-standing CFO, had a much greater habit around wine because and Harold could afford it. So Harold really helped me with this and was one of our first board members, my first outside board member. And when we did an early friends and family round that Harold was part of, and that was fantastic. And a lot of I learned a great deal about imported wine through that early relationship with Harold. But the e-commerce was, again, launch a website. We didn't have there wasn't any, mobile aspects of it, if that's what you're asking. But it was, web-based site. I think on day one, we probably had 1,000 or 1,500 wines. Go back and look at this number, and I thought that was a lot, right? Because a grocery store would have 200 or 300. A fine wine store might have 500, 600, 700 wines. We had 1,500. And of course, pull that forward, last year Wine.com sold more than 40,000 different vintage-specific wine labels. So, you think you have enough, and it's like heavenly days, you only have enough for that customer looking for that next bottle of Rioja, that next bottle of Willamette Valley, white Pinot, et cetera. So the selection ultimately mattered the most. And again, content that was not trying to editorialize or curate even. I would tell you that something my team at Wine.com had always heard is just the idea of a gatekeeper, somebody making a decision in advance of a consumer always bothers me. I could walk into a beautiful wine shop and ask for, where's your selection of South African wines or wines from Israel? And, the response might be, my customers don't buy wines from South Africa. It's like, gotcha. Yeah, there are none here. But when you offer them, and you offer a few hundred choices from South Africa, or 80 wines from Israel, or thousands from France, Italy, and California, it makes a difference. And so I never liked the idea of a gatekeeper, whether it's a restaurant sommelier or a steward, making a decision. In advance of a consumer. Now, restaurants have a small list, so again, if you've got an Italian restaurant, likely you should have Italian wines. I'm not going to argue with that, but again, I think it's more the retail environment that always bothers me about, whether it's variety or region, price points that get left out. We had the luxury, again, having a warehouse, not a retail store. I would not be, a traditional retail environment wouldn't know what to do with 40,000 wines. You know why? Because I'd want to put them in every different spot, like all the 90-point rated wines over here, and wines made of Merlot in another section, but they're made from Merlot from Italy, so they ought to be in Italy also. You can't do this in a physical store without a lot of redundant inventory and a hell of a lot of space. But in e-commerce, of course we can. We can allow a consumer to slice and dice the database, whittling that wine down to the selection they want, and then maybe it's just showing the 9 that qualify based on parameters, price, ratings, where it's grown, what's in it, et cetera.
How did you deal with sort of interstate laws with alcohol? Obviously, every state is different. You're in the early days of selling wine through the internet. How did you handle logistics like that?
Well, I was lucky. My lawyer for my business in Portland was Milt Stewart of Davis Wright Tremaine, and Milt, who quickly heard about this dream of mine, introduced me to a partner, the late Jim Neal, who was an expert in national beverage alcohol law. We were lucky to have him in Portland with Davis Wright Tremaine, and so Jim and a partner on, maybe then an associate of the team, Jess Lyon, who remains our attorney today, I should say. But Jess and Jim heard me out and knew what I wanted to accomplish, and it helped us thread the needle, because you're absolutely right, this industry is highly regulated. At the retail tier, it's impossible to have even financial investors who are part of the industry. So even though I could tell other folks in Oregon about this project, wineries can't invest. Wholesalers who benefit from strong retail partners can't invest because of financial assistance laws and tied house laws that exist, for generations, before me. So our first license was on Swan Island, but that only gave us a chance to reach about a dozen, maybe 14 states. So very quickly, we knew we had to get licensed in other states. And I should say, this is in 4th of July. I had this idea earlier on, late 98, early 99. Over a 4th of July weekend, my father told me that he was going to be retiring at a young age. I mean, he needed to do something else, but he had been in the newspaper business for his career, and the paper was offering, the parent company was offering a chance for an early retirement, and he was going to take advantage of it. So over 4th of July, I said, well, you know what? I've got an interesting, project here. And by the way, I'm just totally blew with these dates on you for a minute. 1998. That would have been July. We didn't really get off the ground to 99, but it was July 4th of 1998, and I know because I was down on the Umpqua River at my grandparents' home when Dad told me he was retiring, and I told him, I've got a project for you. And he was in general management, so of the Medford Mail Tribune for his career, and other things they were doing. Dow Jones owned the company, and so he had been in that environment. And a business generalist told Dad, hey, we've got to get a license in New York, got to get a license in Florida, got to get licensed in Texas. These were all states that are large states for wine consumption, but do not allow a retailer to ship wine to New York or ship wine to Texas. It's the third rail in this industry. So what you had to do is, it's not that you're shipping wine there, you're getting licensed as a retail business in New York. Dad put that first warehouse in Long Island City, very close to Metro New York, but close to the wholesalers, very much like the same logistics we did on Swell Island here in Oregon. And we did that in 5 or 6 states very rapidly in 1999. And I think by the end of the year, we could probably service a good 70% of consumption with just 6 or 7 locations. And that meant that website was not just the same website for everybody. Selection varied, pricing varied because our cost would vary, and availability, vintages. We might be on the 20. At the time, let's go back to the dates. We could have been on the '96 vintage in Oregon, but New York would have been on the next vintage, in '97, or a vintage behind. So vintage-specific content, really important. A website that wasn't just one website; it was many different, if you will, databases, or clicking and plucking this. But we had to ask you first, where are you going to ship? Then show you the right catalog. And that catalog was crazy cool to create. So Dad helped me. I've never given him credit as the founder of the company. It's like I kind of started it, but Dad was there on day 2, day 1. He should be. We probably should have handed out that founder flag to everybody who was in early days. Jim Barano certainly did at Willamette Valley Vineyards, which we'll get to later in this. But nevertheless. The regulatory framework, really important. People would always ask me, how are you getting around the laws? It's like, there's no getting around them. We're in them. And then you have to explain slowly that we're a retailer. We're a retailer. We just don't have a storefront. Don't expect neon signs or a brightly lit store. Our stores are going to be warehouses. And our delivery mechanism will be, early days it was UPS, later it's FedEx. There's back and forth with the carriers, but that's the ultimate delivery. It's not come by the store. The store's a warehouse. And that gives us a chance then to, again, organize the warehouse the way a warehouse should be organize the storefront consumer friendly. It was, so this went on. If that company, again, I should disclose, I left wine.com in May of this year. So again, that will be this transition to Willamette Valley Vineyards we'll talk about. But so if I say we, it's it's over time, right? But wine.com had every warehouse location it once had. I think I've counted 16 different warehouses to serve the nation. Thankfully, it went up and it went down. At this point, I believe the company only has 6 warehouses, and we're still serving the same footprint we would have had to with 16. So when people think there hasn't been progress for direct-to-consumer business or e-commerce, they're wrong. There has been progress, but it still requires presence in New York. It still requires presence in Texas. It still requires presence in New Jersey and Massachusetts, Ohio, to do proper U.S.-wide business.
So take me through the growth of wine.com, putting together that initial database, growing it, and finding customers. What were some of the milestones for you along the way? What were the big moments?
Well, I mean, just, after the friends and family round, just finding and recruiting the team and finding shareholders who wanted to be part of a business that, you say high growth, but it was actually, quite frankly, low growth. It's a tough business to be out in a regulated environment and also expressing a category that's never been much for e-commerce, or even catalog retailers didn't exist in the U.S. with wine very well. So we were, early days were more slow growth. We raised money, every 18 months to 2 years. It was still the promise of growing the business and building it. It had a lot of organic growth. Thankfully, it didn't have any crazy growth that was artificial, frankly, until the pandemic, which, when everyone, you hunker everyone down in their home, they have no choice but to adopt e-commerce. And that was a crazy year, because the business went from 155 million to more than 360 within a 12-month period. So that was you know, you take it or leave it. That was the environment of the pandemic, as we all remember from, where you were on March, or 15th of 2020 to where you were even 18 months later. It was a lot of business. But what the first kind of concerns or issues happened right there in year 2000 with the .com bust. There was a competitor of ours. Actually, they had started the business, I think in 1996, called Virtual Vineyards, and it was largely started by two principals. One was in the wine business, one was in technology, and Silicon Valley meets. Peter Granoff was the proprietor with the wine knowledge, and I think his brother-in-law Robert Olson had. I think I'm getting this right here. It's popping in my brain again. They had the software, and they had a business called Virtual Vineyards, but very different. They were running a curated business. Peter is one heck of a wine expert, and so that was important to them. And I looked at that and said, what I didn't find available at Virtual Vineyards in 96, 97, 98 was national brands. I didn't find sort of the comfort brands that I might have, like Kendall Jackson or Ferrari Carano or Willamette Valley Vineyards or Adelsheim Pinot. It was not that. It was more obscure and a lot of California. And so they were truly the first in this category. They had a lot of growth of a team, but not necessarily revenue, leading up to the .com boom. They had bust. Sorry, they had. Merged with another company called Wine Shopper, and then together their board of directors acquired the wine.com domain name from somebody not in the industry, but was probably just camped on it, I guess. Changed Virtual Vineyards and Wine Shopper to wine.com, and later it's got to be late 2000, they borrowed money to make payroll. They had a huge team, more than 400 employees at the time. They borrowed money and didn't pay it back by, it was probably March or April. And the holder of that asset reached out to us because we were a going concern. Probably the same amount of revenue, but fewer people. I wouldn't know what to do with 400 people at the time. I do today. but we were able to acquire the domain in a transaction, and just overnight, people would go into wine.com. They were suddenly landing on eVineyard, powered by wine.com or some mark like that. Because they ultimately in 2000 or 2001 had to file bankruptcy to eliminate that debt and equity they had in it. We stayed away from using the moniker wine.com for another year. But after that, it was clear. The trade knew that we didn't file bankruptcy. That was, we were eVineyard, and wine.com was a DBA. And again, when you have a chance to have, I still like the term, I like eVineyard, it's fine, but when you have the chance to have the Park Avenue address of just wine.com, pretty clear what you do. So that is what we opted to do. And then, now a couple decades later, the same was happening. But, it was, what I really enjoyed in 27 years as a merchant was creating something new, innovative, meeting winemakers who frankly didn't need another retailer. They had plenty of choices, but they liked the innovation, and what the innovation brought them were younger consumers than they would have traditionally. It would invite them into being able to, kind of on an even playing field, whether you were making 10,000 cases or 100,000 cases, you had the same presence, your brand. You had, images, later we have lots of video to show and the like. But when you have a chance to level the playing field, it looks very different than when you walk into into a grocery store and there is a set with the brand stacked there and you go, well, this must be really important. Well, it may be important to somebody, but it may not be important to the consumer because you look the same facing on wine.com, whether you're big or small, whether you're making Pinot Noir or Cabernet Sauvignon or a Rhone blend from Chateauneuf-du-Pape. I thought that was really important. I met the most incredible people in nearly 3 decades. Lots of travel, lots of chance to break bread, and like I say, these folks, they didn't need to sell to us. They wanted to. They wanted to be a part of our site. And over the next, it was probably just 10 years into that, we began then hosting an annual conference with Nielsen and my great friend Danny Brager, who has since left Nielsen, but he was involved in basically, explaining to the industry through the lens of wine.com about growth. We actually called it the Wine Industry Growth Summit that we ran. And because we were showing growth, but we're also showing growth in consumer activity. We're showing growth in, yes, millennials, Gen Z, Gen X are drinking wine, will come to wine. And because we have, we knew exactly who was buying. Brands, even today, I'm with Willamette Valley Vineyards, as you know, but we sell wine to a wholesaler who sells it to a retailer, and we lose track of it. If it's going to a retailer in Tallahassee, Florida, a Publix store, I won't know who bought it off the shelf. I know I sold it to Publix, our wholesaler did, but I don't know much more about it. When you have that direct consumer relationship, you know a whole lot about them. You know what else they buy. You know what else they browse. You know the price points, varieties. There's so much opportunity, and that's exciting about consumer businesses where you have a chance to have that direct connection. The only thing like it, I think, today in the wine industry is operating tasting rooms, and as Willamette Valley does, restaurants, and the chances for direct access to consumers is really important, and that has a lot of corollary into why Willamette Valley Vineyards in general, but e-commerce, direct consumer activity, the industry ate this up. So our Industry Growth Summit was always widely attended, usually 500-600 guests. During the pandemic, I think we hosted a webinar on 2 occasions with more than 1,000 guests. And then the next year it was hybrid, 800 people in 2021. So that conference lives on today, and it's something that trade really learned from. They like to see what data we had, and first party data. That was a big difference.
So I'm curious about that data, especially say a decade in, say we're looking at 2010 or so. What was it showing you? What was surprising, or what was the industry not expecting, perhaps, from the data that you were showing them?
I can tell you straight on, it was always the average selling price, substantially higher than the industry. So we were running and we offered the world. We didn't offer if it's $5 or $6 or it's sold in a 3-liter bladder pack. I can't ship that. Nobody can. but from $8 and higher, most popular wines, customers were always buying about 3 times the national average. So, with the national average being, between $10 and $11, we were always running, $31, $32 a bottle. That was important, but also 2 other pieces that are really fascinating. One is, of course, that younger consumers in every decile, even if forget the demographics, just take deciles 21 to 29, 21 to 30, or 31 to 39, just 10-year deciles. Younger consumers, on average, buy more expensive wine than each decile above them. And it's the opportunity, when they're buying champagne, it's like, I would hear it, you get champagne and sparkling wine mixed up. We certainly don't in Oregon. We have a sparkling wine business, or method traditional here at Domain Willamette. But yeah, I would get the comment that, oh, that's so cute. The young consumers must buy Prosecco. It's like, baloney. Mom and dad buy Prosecco. The boomers buy Prosecco. They buy Cava. Champagne is drank by the youngest consumers in our world, and continue to, an example. Another interesting thing, and this actually it's become more and more prevalent than it was even at first. Early days, we were 50-50, imports, domestic. Half the business imports, half the business domestic. And that's rare, because in the US, it's 3/4 of the wine sold is domestic wine, only 1/4 imports. And again, I'll give you the why, even though you didn't ask me, Rich. It's because somebody made a buying decision. The knucklehead who said, my customers don't buy South Africa, or they won't buy wines from, again, from Spain or Portugal. They're wrong. The reason why they didn't buy them is they didn't offer them. So if you untethered offer access to wine, they come. And By the way, the last several years of Wine.com's business, when I was running the merchandising and the business, 60% was imported wine. In 2024, half of the business was actually European Union. EU wine, meaning 10% of the remaining of imported wine would be from Chile, Argentina, Australia, New Zealand, ad nauseum, right? These other countries, there's a lot of volume, but not a lot of value. But by the way, when I do that 60-40 split or 50-50, it's, whether it's revenue or units, it's identical. One of the reasons is because, Napa Valley makes expensive wine. We all know champagne is expensive, sparkling wine, fine. So there's expensive wine in both domestic and import. So slicing it, whether it's in unit volume or value, made no difference at all. Bordeaux is expensive. Rioja isn't, there's always pockets, but when you offer that choice. So I think it's back to, you offer the world, let a consumer have access, they do it. Mm-hmm. They buy more expensive wine because it's an affordable luxury. That's what we're all selling. Now, Oregon's always had a price point. So in Oregon, and certainly the Willamette Valley, sets a difference with respect to the average selling price. So if I told you $30 a bottle, you'd say, yeah, that's pretty average Pinot. But if in the world of wine, that ain't average. And that's why the industry's at 11 or 12 in 2026.
So during this time of growth, tell me about your role. What were you focusing on, and tell me about building a team and growing the business.
I had always been focused on really the consumer behavior, our merchandise, the supply chain, the regulations. We have domain expertise across all of those areas, but I specifically, even in 1999 in May, we recruited a professional CEO in the business. So I was never the CEO. I mean, founder at start, I was alone, right? My dad and I. But when we did hire in 1999 a CEO, and over the next several years, I might lose track because this is those early years of expecting more growth than there was, or the boom and bust and bust and boom back and forth. There may have been 4 other CEOs until 2000 and maybe, I hope I get this right, 2005 or 6, 4, 5, 6, 2006. Met Rich Bergson, who was out of Bain Consulting, had been running an e-commerce business in arts and crafts space, and he was the last CEO I had in the company until fall of 2024, when he left the business just a year ago. But Rich and I then were together for, I probably get this right, I think it's 18 years. Just that's a long time with a partner in business. It was amazing. So what did Rich focus on? Marketing, finance, technology, even the CTO and that. And I focused on the supplier relationships, what products we're selling, the spokesperson for the company, the public facing side of it. Rich would always love to attend wine tastings. It sure beat he reminded me in arts and crafts, the annual convention was on Super Bowl Sunday usually. So it's like, boy, that was crazy. You could go to McCormick, in center in Chicago for the Arts and Crafts Festival, or you could go to the Wine Experience in Manhattan. Or Aspen Food and Wine. It's like, our events don't suck in this industry. So, but Rich was a great partner, and he and I did it together. I mean, this would be silly otherwise to assume. And a great deal of people on the team, and a lot of long-time team members. Even today, as I was departing from Wine.com in May of this year to land here in Oregon again, return to Oregon, I guess you could say. There were folks on my team with 2 decades having been in the same roles, and not in a bad way. What I'm saying is they grew, they learned, they are paramount. They're the pinnacle of industry buyers, and they are, they certainly understood clearly what we stood for, which is that broad selection. Let the consumer decide. Don't make your own, mind up in front of them. You know, I've sold wine I wouldn't drink. I don't choose, I wouldn't drink. I choose not to drink. It's parenthetical. You know, we sold the world of wine. So there's some wine that, it tastes more like Robitussin than wine. And that exists. And we sold it, and that's fine. I can drink what I wish on the other side of it, but we would never want to editorialize, and didn't. I might have inside industry humor to poke fun at some products, but again, they're commercially viable products. They belong. If there's a customer for it in a big enough way, well, I'm all over it. Absolutely. I don't have to drink it every night. I much prefer Oregon Pinot.
So on that note, you talked about that being a big part of what the work you were doing was building inventory and making those relationships. So while you're trying not to be a gatekeeper, you're trying to discover the world of wine and make it available. So tell me about that exploration for you and about figuring out what needed to be in wine.com.
Again, we could be led by publications writing articles, wholesalers telling us what the best-selling wines are in their markets, knowing what along the way. Again, there's new brands being released constantly, in some products that were not perhaps even imported into the U.S. that became imported. Our network was of wholesalers, importers, producers, and then you could say consolidated owners, like the Jackson family, who have a number of properties here in Oregon and California and in the globe. Their national sales team would never leave an item outside of our four walls. And if the family has the Jackson family have 80 brands, they had 80 brands on wine.com. We wanted to make sure we covered things off like this. Clearly it was data driven, and it's not hard. That part's not hard. Making certain that once we do have an item in stock, that the information is clean, fresh, relevant, up-to-date, ratings, pricing, et cetera, and that our wholesalers have products in hand. Because this whole business model of wine.com works with this kind of, I'm going to call it just in time, because we need to buy an economic unit. Might be a pallet in some cases, it might be a case of wine, but we always allowed the customer to buy a bottle. So if they wanted a bottle of that Grenache from Chateauneuf du Pape, I am going to be buying 11 more, hoping that there's a customer for the other 11, right? That's how it works. So I affectionately would call it, real enough time inventory, because we could then count on those 11 are in our shelf, but that nearby wholesaler, they might have 11 pallets or 11 more cases, whatever it might be. Even if it's 3 cases, we would not only show the customer our 11, but we could show them into the wholesaler's inventory. And that model that was from day one. I didn't get into that, but that's one of the magics. As much as the database was consumer facing, the database was trade facing or supply facing, allowing wholesalers to keep up their stock, pricing, availability, shipping dates, et cetera. And, because, different wholesalers, depending on where we were in the country, might be 4 days a week, they might be twice a week, they might be all 5 days were permitted. And so all of that, computers are pretty good, Rich. They're smart at this. We just trained them well, and we had access then to have, that database, not just what was consumer friendly, but also industry facing. As I would, it's not everything we would have to be in inventory. It could come to us tomorrow, and oftentimes did. Now, we never did something, except for maybe Bordeaux Futures. We never did something where the wine was still overseas. Right? It's got to be here. It's got to be in a day or two in order for that order to get to customers swiftly.
You mentioned that obviously you're discovering wines and you're selling wines that you don't personally care for, but I'm curious about...
I care for so many, though. I have thousands of friends that make wine and thousands of wines I want to taste and the wines I haven't tasted. So, but there are wines that, if they're too commercially driven or made by a committee or a chemist, I'm not so preferred. I prefer wines made by winemakers. But that's a personal preference. If you look at the wine.com, business over the years, there's been plenty of wines that are, highly manufactured. I don't apologize for it. The industry has it. We'd be silly not to offer it. And including helping somebody, discover just the next bottle of wine. It's N+1 was always something Rich and I would preach. It's like not just what's here, but if you can take me from this glass, if I could tell you I'm really enjoying this wine, show me something else. because a highly educated consumer is good for the entire industry. It's good for wine.com, it's good for a winery. To have a customer who's really leaning in and learning. If they only drink the same bottle every night, it's pretty boring. Wouldn't be my first choice.
So I'm curious about your developing of your own palate and your own preferences. What wines did you find yourself excited about, and how did your kind of palate progress?
Oh dear. You're not quite asking me my favorite child yet, but that's darn close to it.
That's as far as I'll go, I promise.
That's funny. I would tell you that having been started the company in Portland and having traveled, a great deal of my travel was always domestically. I didn't leave the country to wine country, I should say, until 2004. So. We sold plenty of imported wine before then, but I never really did get out in a way to meet suppliers where they were. And once I got that bug, I have been constantly traveling since. And I think the only major wine growing region I'm embarrassed to say I've not been to is New Zealand, but I've covered off the rest of them many times. Multiple times and many times each year. So imported wine would be that catch, that would be it. As far as the discovery for me, I met my wife in June of 2004. She was working for the Wine Spectator magazine at the time. And of course, she was pouring wine in New York at a wine tasting. Why not? That's where a wine single. I was between my first wife and single at the time. So meeting Gwendolyn at a New York event, and this was in June. But I discovered she was going to go to August, where her parents had a summer house and were on vacation, and she had not yet booked her ticket. It's like, come on, it's June, August, what can we do? So within a couple of weeks of getting to know her, I spun together an itinerary which allowed me to join her, or she joined me in Tuscany to start with, the north of Italy, and her folks. Her mother picked us up at the train station in Avignon, and we went to her home in the Rhone Valley and stayed a few nights there. Took them to, and I reached out to my Rolodex of friends in the Rhone Valley, and they never forget some of the lunches and characters they met on, within a few hours of meeting me, or a few days of meeting me. And her father was a lobbyist, and he was always entertained well, but he looks around at the kind of entertainment that the wine industry has, and the kind of glorious chateaus or estates. This, I think, his exact quote during one lunch where we're having lamb, 3 ways or 13 ways, whatever it was. It's like, this doesn't suck. It's like, the ultimate quote from my father-in-law would be, "Wow, this industry is very clever." And so we did spend a lot of time then on international travel. In part, it was just to make certain that we weren't the gatekeepers, and we were getting out and meeting wineries. Before we had kids, or before Gwendolyn and I together had kids, we had gone to Chile twice, Argentina, covered off other European countries, Australia for a trip. We made the best of it, and including for our honeymoon, went to South Africa, because living on the west coast of the U.S., that's a place that, it takes you a full day, 12 hours to get down to where wine country is in Stellenbosch in Cape Town. So we covered off South Africa. I haven't been there since. I sure wish I could have, but since 2008, that was a trip. But Gwendolyn had the travel bug, which I caught, and therefore, have spent, a lot of travel. It's fun, and you meet the same people. Back to the U.S. at certain events and trade tastings and the like, which it's very nice to have broken bread with them in their own community and see them when they're traveling through the country.
So obviously, your first exposure was to Oregon wine. Tell me about your impressions of Oregon wine at that time, and as you started to taste imported wine, as you started to travel, how Oregon matched up, how Oregon fell in the world of wine.
Yeah, I think in Portland restaurants and such, I was probably having, maybe it was, half Oregon, half, California and Washington State. Again, not outside of Champaign. I didn't maybe support. I didn't have in my early 20s or maybe late 20s. I didn't have a lot of exposure to the Rhone Valley or Bordeaux. That was not affordable at the products I like to taste and the like. So Oregon first. It was like I was certainly drinking all of the best wines from Oregon, which I think if I looked at your at your archives, Rich, I bet every wine I was enjoying when 30, 35 years ago are wineries or principals that you would have already spoken to in these kind of interviews. David Lett, Dick Erath, Dick Ponzi, everything Roland was doing, and also I was, folks still lived in Medford, right? I'm in Portland. I would be on Interstate 5 on weekends, for certainly holidays, but even more than that, probably monthly, driving by Willamette Valley Vineyards. So it was, well beyond the Enchanted Forest. And when I didn't have interest in that anymore, the children's amusement site, right, on Enchanted Way, right next to that is Willamette Valley Vineyards, which is the amusement park for adults, right? A chance to get up there and taste. I know Willamette Valley was certainly one of my first stops. And, when you're a young consumer in wine, I was probably guilty, like others, of having more of a sweet tooth. So I might have been, enjoying, the Riesling to start with from Oregon, certainly Pinot Noir and Pinot Gris, but I wasn't as refined as I was, once I got in the industry. And I don't, Riesling today for me is all dry, and bone dry Riesling. And of course we make some off dry Riesling at Willamette Valley. But meeting the early teams in Oregon, having a chance. I don't need to mention more names because I'm going to leave somebody out that I know lovely, and spent too much, plenty of time with. But the industry thought what we were doing at eVineyard and later Wine.com was very clever and great support. And having a chance to taste those products, I missed out on maybe a whole lot of new upstart wineries probably in the last 15 years. If they didn't exist, back between 98 and to 2008, if they came after and they're only distributed in Oregon, I probably didn't meet them, unfortunately, because once Wine.com left Portland and moved to San Francisco for its corporate offices and was covering the country, if the wine's not in national markets, I can't smuggle it in, right? We can't, you can't deal with it. So a farm winery, somebody who's just selling in Oregon to their mailing list or through direct-to-consumer activation at the tasting room and such, it was not relevant to me. I'm sure it's beautiful wine. It's just I didn't have any relevancy. Yet the national brands, were nationally sold brands. It doesn't mean you have to be big. You just have to be organized and make certain you have wholesale distribution in other states. Yeah.
So you've talked about the kind of the growth of the company for you. So tell me about this step for you and about deciding that you want to become a general manager at a winery. How does it come up, and what makes the decision for you?
So it's interesting. Rich, I left out a stint in, maybe the first time I actually had worked in the producer side of the wine industry. In late 2002, the board of directors of Wine.com wanted to move the company to the Bay Area, where principally they had raised more money, we had raised more money, and investors were there. And then frankly, our chairman had free office space. And again, at the time, a lot of office space in downtown San Francisco empty from failed businesses. And so free rent was one issue, being closer to the chairman at the time. And so the company was moving. My then wife and I made a decision not to move. And so I did a little bit of consulting with them in the transition to California. But then I had been in contact with Bernard Lecroute and his then wife Ronnie about a general management role at Willamette Estate. This was the same year that Laurent Montelou had left the company to do his own project. So Laurent had been the general manager and winemaker. Now it was time that Ronnie and Bernie were going to separate that role into a general manager and a winemaker. And in 2003, I then walked a mile, maybe a half mile in the footsteps of producers, because during that year, I certainly learned a whole lot more about being on the supplier side of it, working markets and the like. And by the end of the year, I had decided the best thing for Willamette was to move into a portfolio managed approach for national sales, and that was with Wilson Daniels Company. And at the time, they still do have DRC. They had at the time the Ponzi portfolio as well, and maybe that was it from Oregon. But they had a gorgeous portfolio of global wines at Wilson Daniels, and the Underwood family, who then later had bought Columbia Distributing here, and such were the principals, and knew them well as a customer. So here we, on the shoes on the other foot. Bernie and I, negotiated for Willa Kinsey to move into that portfolio. Interesting enough, Christmas, kind of the week between Christmas and New Year's of 2003, having this position Willa Kinsey off to Wilson Daniels, the board chairman of Wine.com called to say he needed to make some changes. And I didn't realize at the time he was going to ask the then CEO to leave, because he invited me down in January, and by February 15th, I was in the role again as the executive vice president. Again, doing the same thing I did before. Executive vice president, running, merchandising, trade relationships, all these other goodies, okay? And he did, at the time, then ask that gentleman to leave. Back to Cal, and then at the time I had separated from my then wife and moved to San Francisco, and then spent a lot of time in national markets. As I may have shared earlier, a lot of travel to New York and other markets. In New York is where I met my current wife, my wife. Shouldn't say the word current. That's not good. Kidding. Gwendolyn in New York, and so lots of. That kind of 1 year as a general manager of Willa Kinsey. Okay, now you pull this ahead. I mentioned in the fall of 2024, my business partner Rich Bergson was asked by the current Wine.com board, which is primarily owned by Goldman Sachs by this point. So I pulled this ahead. We'd raised money from them in 2018 and a few more times since. Our chairman of the board, unfortunately, had passed away in late 2022, and his stock was again picked up primarily by Goldman. So at Wine.com, I had a single shareholder, and they had asked my partner to leave. And it's somewhat suddenly, but in the fall of 24. After all, 18 years of building a business together. So you could say I was a little disenchanted. I certainly gave my advice. Clearly, it wasn't taken, if it's not clear. But at the same time, I'm reading emails or hearing from friends that Jim Bernot was announcing that he was going to recruit a CEO at Willamette Valley Vineyards, the first CEO in the company since he started it in 1983. But Jim, founder, viticulturist and wine grower, as he calls himself, and CEO, and he was going to separate those roles and take the role of chairman of the board and president of the winery. He's always been the founder, and recruit a CEO. And a couple little volleys of some emails, chat with their national sales manager, who I had known for many years, a couple of decades, having been a supplier to us in different roles. There was a time in mid-February I took a meeting with Jim up here. And he didn't at the time know sort of why is there a chance that you could actually escape Wine.com, a business that was in his words, like for so long, are you given a chance? Can you take on this opportunity? And so it did take a little bit of, that it was, I'm not going to say negotiation, it was more like if, working on the strategy of onboarding me in this capacity. Jim is an extraordinary entrepreneur, and so, and again, somebody who I had a chance to meet, very young in the industry, met with each of his board members, met with the management team, and it's sad because it's true, but it's sad. I think Jim even put it in company-wide email. Mike's the only one, who applied for this job. It doesn't have a resume. Really, it doesn't. He didn't. I think he said, this is sad. He said he didn't apply for the job, nor does he have a resume. It's like, well, my joke, because it's like, well, my resume is pretty transparent. I mean, I would only have one thing after some work in software. I only have one thing on my plate, and I'm very transparent. In the industry, has written too much, and I have no bones in the closet. I have nowhere to hide. And so that was kind of funny. But I also, again, very differently came at this business. Jim did not want to hire a general manager. And he told me that a couple of times. Like, he was not seeking, and nor were his board for that matter, seeking somebody to be a caretaker of Willamette Valley Vineyards. He wanted an entrepreneur. He wanted somebody to, continue the entrepreneurial efforts that Jim Bernot put into this company for 44 years. And that takes a different cut. Do I manage people? I think I do a great job, a good job. Maybe I wouldn't say great job of managing people. I can certainly recruit and retain and hold them accountable, but it's not materialistic, right? It's not driven from a, what do you want to say, military or government approach to managing people, for goodness sakes. Talented people at Willamette Valley Vineyards will continue to have most talented people I can recruit in the industry, and they are self-starters and capable of following the passion that we put forward, but also being a star in Oregon, but a star in the national wine scene. We need that. So I was lucky. I mean, timing couldn't have been more perfect. It's a bit surreal, or a lot of serendipity would apply here, I'd say, because who would have thought that the timing of Jim's wanting to step back coincided with the opportunity for me to escape and return to Oregon, because that's a big part of it. My folks live at the Oregon coast today. My sister and her family live also in the Coos Bay market. I do a lot of travel, and I will continue to do a lot of travel. This was a return for me to Oregon.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about your initial impressions of your role and what you saw as kind of the initial need-tos. What was your first 6 months, your first year, your first couple of years as you saw it when you took the job?
Well, Rich, I'm only on this for 7 months now, so I don't have a couple of years under it. But I'd say, the first couple of months were, learning the business. It is a very interesting company, and we are a unicorn in the wine industry. I'm not going to say a unicorn in Oregon. I'm going to say a unicorn in the global wine industry. To operate 11 brands from every nook and cranny of Oregon, from Rogue River Valley, my birthplace, Umpqua Valley, most appellations in Oregon, Dundee Hills, Eola, Tualatin in the States, as well as the greater Willamette, where the estate is. Walla Walla, where we're up in the Sabine, so the high elevation is where we grow Cabernet Sauvignon and Malbec and Cab Franc. The Rocks district of Milton Freewater, where we have all the Rhone varieties. So now I'm back to my friendship with shutting at the pop, like Syrah, Grenache, Mourvèdre, Viognier. It's like, I love that. If you get dropped off there, it reminds you of Chateauneuf de Pape, those Galets, the Rocks. I love covering off Oregon. It's complicated, but what's also complicated about the business is the tasting room and outposts we have. So we're operating tasting rooms now I'll go Walla Walla. Oliver Holdings Vineyard Land is the Oregon side, but we do have a proper tasting room in downtown Walla Walla across from the Whitman Hotel. We've got restaurants in Vancouver, Washington on the waterfront, Happy Valley, Oregon, as well as Lake Oswego, Bend, Oregon, and one down in Folsom, California. We call it Willamette Wine Works. And then you got the estate in Salem Hills, again, back to my enchanted forest comment, sorry, right on Interstate 5, a lot of tourists, a lot of tourism can happen because of its proximity to civilization and the thoroughfare. We're here at Domaine Willamette, the heart of Dundee, and then up at Tualatin Estate Vineyards, we've got a proper tasting room. Some of them have great food pairings. Now, they're proper restaurants too, but the question, we don't want to be a restaurant. We're a tasting room. Our chef, DJ McIntyre has now been with us for 10 years. We just celebrated his 10th year in June, and he puts together an ever-changing seasonal menu at every one of the outposts. And you can eat it 7 of them in a row if you choose, and you'll have a different meal because it's not cookie cutter whatsoever. It's what they can get locally. So you were asking what I've done. So first of all is assess the business, understand it, learn it, the nomenclature. This direct-to-consumer I love, never have been in the restaurant business. I've eaten out a lot. That doesn't make you an expert. Thank God DJ doesn't need my expertise on the menu, right? Just as Terry Colton, our amazing winemaker, who I know you've also interviewed recently for the archives, Terry does it. He invites me to taste and look at some options as they are doing some blending, but that's only for curiosity's sake. I won't make the tie-breaking vote. I shouldn't. He's crazily talented. So, and his team, I should cite. But what I did tell you, I'll tell you, what I needed to learn was a lot about that back of the office operations for our restaurants, and also what I did know I was coming into is a time when the industry has headwinds with respect to whether it's wine consumption, distribution contraction, or accounts really having a lot of parts of the wine industry have more wine than we have in excess. And job number one is actually get national distribution in a way that the Oregon industry is very healthy in the Pacific Northwest. I might even argue to say too healthy, but let's just keep all the business we have in the Northwest, and let's just expand and say we should have more than 2.6% of the national wine market is Oregon wine. There are plenty of restaurants, back to my eating habits, I walk into and I can't find an Oregon wine on a wine list, even at a white tablecloth restaurant, whether it's in Manhattan or Miami, or Richmond, Virginia. It's like we have the wine to get to the national markets. Or wine stewards know Oregon Pinot Noir. They know the Willamette Valley. They can pick it out of a lineup on the list, but they don't always have the assortment and the consistency of an assortment from Oregon. So I'm not going to tell you this is easy, but I will tell you that there is a lot of green space ahead of us, opportunities where Oregon isn't represented, or the Oregon that we want. So I go back to the Oregon I might want. It's like, sure, I'm drinking some Pinot Noir today. I hope you see. But this is the Trojan horse, no question about it. But we're making world-class Chardonnay, but we're also making world-class traditional method, champagne stunt double, I'll call it for a moment, to use a term Mark Oldman had once coined. This champagne stunt double is alive and well, making a method champenoise style, method traditional, we would call it here, at Domaine Willamette with Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Pinot Meunier on a biodynamic vineyard is crazy cool. And it's arguably amongst the best sparkling wine you could have on the globe, and we're doing it in Oregon, and others are doing it too. We're not alone. There's an entire following of producers who are we're following them, but they're following us. Roland Souls is greatly our hats off to him clearly, because he was the pioneer at Argyle, having started that business and putting Oregon sparkling on the map. But the quality and what he's doing today, even under his own labels, is crazy cool. And we're a part of that story. We have to do that nationally, though. It's not enough that we're talking to the Oregon market. And I'm not going to say that we need a global market for wine. There's a lot of that's riddled with a lot of competition and external factors and variables. But so I have no interest in send our wine to Georgia if I can't get our wine in the country of Georgia, the Republic of Georgia. I'd rather get it in Atlanta, Georgia tomorrow. And there's work to do there, and we're doing it. So that is, I think you're going to find 2026, a lot of my personal, work and that moving forward is to, fix the glitch in Oregon wine. And not just for us. I think all boats will rise with the tide of Oregon wines being recognized. And that also includes press, public relations, having unique stories to tell. We're flattered recently to have a couple of photographs in Wine Spectator magazine of truffle foraging that DJ McIntyre was doing. And again, there's all these elements about, if it's just wine you have to tell a story about, it's one leg, but when you get to add to it Oregon's unique white truffle season and the chance to tell that story, crazy cool. And then, I'm pretty thrilled about this RV park we have. It's called Into the Woods at Willamette Valley Vineyards. It's got 33 sites for trailers. We have 3 permanent Airstream trailers there. And the team loves it. When I'm on the property, certainly during the summer months, I would always be bored. If it was open, I was renting one of the Airstream trailers because that's cool. It's so cool. And you're hearing, you can hear Interstate 5, but it's kind of interesting the way this ravine is. It just sounds like ocean waves, like white noise. It doesn't, nobody honks in Oregon, thank God. So you can sleep, right on I-5, it's like, it's waves. So the Airstream, so again, back to PR, our team is wired up to let's talk about our business with hospitality in mind. Gorgeous places to stay, a chance for tourism, which doesn't just mean buying a bottle of wine or a case of wine and schlepping it home. It's enjoying food prepared properly. And we know we share the wine wallet with others. So we're always happy when I meet people in the tasting room who are traveling outside the country. So outside the region, I should say. Some are outside the country, but outside the region, it's always fun to know where else are they going, who do they consider to be stopping at. And I can tell you, experiences matter. That's what our consumers want. Here at Domain Willamette, one of the experiences is learning to savor a bottle. Let's open the bottle of wine with a proper wine saver, and guests eat this up, and they get to leave with the saver. Safely leave with a saber. It can be a dangerous tool, but it's crazy cool the different things we can do unique to Oregon, and also I would tell you. It's exciting in this environment, unlike California, where there's so many really overbearing land use laws. It's not. It's quite common to have to make an appointment in Napa or Sonoma County. By appointment only is a whole swath of the industry. Whereas in Oregon, we have a lot of guests who are just coming for the day. And I don't want to call them surprise guests because we want them to come, but you don't have to have an appointment. We don't create that pretentious barrier. Now, I don't want to say it's all pretense. I think sometimes it's land use laws in California that stand in the way, but they don't here in Oregon. And our tasting rooms have a lot of guests who are drop-in. And that's so clever because it gives us a chance to engage and for them to be comfortable without having a time clock ticking.
So as you've talked a bit about kind of your next steps here, tell me about future for yourself. Is there anything on your horizon you're excited about, either personally or professionally? Anything you haven't done that you want to do? Anything that you're looking forward to? Oh boy.
That's loaded. So to be 100% transparent here, this is we're talking about December of 2025. I am living in Northern Virginia, raising 3 teenage daughters, and so I am doing a lot of commuting to and from. I've been doing a lot of commuting out here, which is enjoyable. My girls have also come out. Teenage daughters love Airstream trailers. I can tell you that. It's like they're not just on television anymore. They're living the dream. They love to see their grandparents, as I mentioned, and cousins that live here. So we're actually coming in the day after Christmas to spend 10 days out here as well. But some people have asked, where do you live now? Or have you moved in? It's like, my wife's not going to move 3 teenage daughters, and so we're going to be bi-coastal for a bit, and I don't apologize for that. That's really important to get them through. I think that back to what I'm looking forward to, the minute the last is off into college, it's highly possible that we are not in Northern Virginia, but we're in wine country here. That is a step, but it's going to take a little bit of time. The good news about living where we do, I have a chance to see the country a lot, and I have exposure to our wholesaler network. I tell you, we're under-indexed, not just Willamette Valley Vineyards. The entire Oregon industry is under-indexed in the eastern U.S., and I want to fix that glitch, not just for us, but for others. And I can be a 3-hour train ride to New York, an hour to Philadelphia. Large markets are nearby, 2 hours down to Tampa, or even further south in Florida. But think about those Tampa, Orlando markets where so many accounts are based. There is a lot of market work that is in my wheelhouse, and we're doing it, and not going to rest. Jim Bernal reminds me of the amount of time he spent on the road selling Oregon in the early days. And I think that a lot of, maybe others did too, but a lot of the industry didn't do it for a while. Wasn't as active for a while. The Willamette Valley Vineyards, probably a lot of our contemporaries who were founded 30, 40 years ago the principals were not doing as much travel. 10 years, you don't blame them. They aged a bit, but they also, traveling is, it's not always glorious, and there's a lot of other work to do locally. So I think that the opportunity for me is to grow the national business and sleep as much as I can, east and west, and maybe stop off in between. And I have, because there are plenty of markets in between here and the East Coast that also are under-indexed and that we're working on.
All right. All the questions that I have for you today. Anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover that you're hoping to cover today?
Well, I'd be remiss in not thanking the owners of Willamette Valley Vineyards for their dedication to the company. This business, and something I didn't cover off, quite unique, and I know Jim probably covered it in his archive interview with you, but the idea of having both common shareholders traded on the NASDAQ, but our preferred shareholders, which is a unique kind of club program where preferred shareholders get to participate in a dividend instrument that they annually could either redeem for a dividend, or that's about 5.5% interest is what it pays, or they can take that dividend in wine, and many do, most do, I should say, frankly. But our owners are passionate people. What I had a chance this summer to do is meet so many of them. As early as the middle of May, we had events. I would try to go to as many of them as I could, including our Owners Weekend, but also our Club Willamette, which is a Camp Willamette. Sorry, it's at that Into the Woods RV park, and live music, great barbecue, a lot of events, outdoor festivities. Anyway. Owners, they are the lifeblood of Willamette Valley and Willamette Valley Vineyards. They're probably the lifeblood of all of the Willamette Valley for that matter, because there are wine enthusiasts who have invested in the company and are, frankly, those, they're evangelists for Willamette Valley Vineyards. They're evangelists for Oregon Pinot Noir. They live in every nook and cranny of the country. At one of our events, even I swear I had, at least 6 couples or 7, that were from Virginia, from namely living like in, nearby county and the like, but also Floridians, New Yorkers, all over the country. So Jim did something very innovative, right? He raised money from this community in 1989, and then later it moved it to the NASDAQ in the early 1990s, 94, 95. That is, today, by the way, you would call it crowdsourced or crowdfunded. That word didn't exist until 2005. I looked at it's a bit of trivia because it was like, wow, because people say, I explained the business model, like, oh, you crowdfunded it. It's like, well, in 1989, that didn't exist. I read that it was 2004 or 5, I think it's 2005 when Wired magazine first mentioned, a journalist had uttered the term. Jim did this years before, and it's crazy cool. And that gives us a chance to have a very interested customer base. I say interested, invested customer base, evangelists, love our wine, give us a lot of advice. Don't get me wrong, it's all good. They love to share, and we love to listen, and we will continue to take that into account because there are headwinds, but they don't have to be for everybody, right? We want to take this and really cherish our ownership. So owners we didn't cover off. I wish it's an important part of this DNA of this business, and our team and our tasting room associates wake up every day to please.
All right.
Thank you, Rich.
Thank you so much for taking the time to share with us today. We appreciate this, the story. We appreciate this beautiful space here at Domain Willamette. And we'll go ahead and let you off the hook.
Thank you, Rich.
You.